The afternoon sun shone brightly over Dubai. Victoria Hale stood inside the grand lobby of a luxury hotel, staring at her phone. Her flight to London had been cancelled. Her private transport had been delayed. And the most important business meeting of her career was scheduled for the next morning. Victoria was the CEO of Hale International, a successful British company based in London. She was known for being confident, intelligent, and extremely demanding. People rarely saw her nervous. But today was different. She had only one person she trusted to handle a crisis like this: Daniel Carter, her personal secretary. Daniel was 34, British, highly organized, and a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. He was also the only employee who never panicked when Victoria was under pressure. Her phone rang. "Daniel, I'm already in Dubai." Victoria stopped walking. "What?" "I took the first flight I could get. You weren't supposed to come." "I know." "You have Sophie." "She's staying with my sister." Victoria sighed. "Daniel, I didn't ask you to travel halfway across the world." "I know." His voice remained calm. "But you need someone you trust." Victoria couldn't argue with that. "Where are you?" "At your hotel." Victoria looked around. "Then come upstairs." There was a short pause. "I will." The call ended. Victoria returned to her suite. The hotel had recently upgraded her room because of an unexpected booking issue. She had been given access to one of the property's most exclusive suites, a royal suite normally reserved for important guests. Victoria found it strange, but she was too busy to question it. She placed her phone on the table and looked through the documents for tomorrow's meeting. 5 minutes later, she heard the electronic lock. The door opened. Daniel walked inside. Victoria immediately frowned. "You opened the door." Daniel looked at the lock. "It wasn't locked." "It should have been." "I know." "You didn't knock." "I tried." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't explain anything." Daniel walked farther into the suite. His expression suddenly became serious. "Something is wrong." Victoria looked at him. "What?" He pointed toward the center table. There was a black folder sitting there. Victoria hadn't seen it before. "What is that?" "I don't know." Daniel approached the table but didn't touch it. Victoria opened the folder. Inside was a confidential agreement belonging to Hale International. Her eyes widened. "This document isn't supposed to leave London." Daniel nodded. "Who has access?" "Only a handful of people." Victoria turned another page. There was a list of names. 3 Hale International executives, 2 investors, and 1 unexpected name: Daniel Carter. Victoria looked at him. "Why is your name here?" Daniel looked genuinely confused. "I don't know." "You expect me to believe that?" "I wouldn't blame you if you didn't." Victoria studied his face. Daniel had worked for her for 6 years. He had never given her a reason to doubt him. But now his name was sitting inside a confidential document in a royal suite that neither of them had requested. Before Victoria could say anything else, there was a knock. The hotel manager entered. "Ms. Hale, I'm sorry to disturb you." Victoria looked at him. "What's happening?" The manager looked uncomfortable. "There's been a problem with the suite." "What kind of problem?" "This suite wasn't originally assigned to you." Victoria frowned. "Then why was I moved here?" "We don't know." Daniel stepped forward. "Who requested the change?" The manager hesitated. "That information isn't available to us." Victoria folded her arms. "Someone changed my reservation." "Yes." "When?" "Earlier today." Daniel exchanged a look with Victoria. The manager then removed a small envelope from his jacket. "Mr. Carter, this was left for you." Daniel took it. Inside was an old key card. "Room 4107. Daniel looked at the manager. "What is room 4107? The man's expression changed. "It is an old royal suite." "Old?" "It hasn't been used for years." Victoria looked at Daniel. "Why would someone send you there?" "I don't know." The manager lowered his voice. The instruction was very specific. "What instruction?" He looked at Daniel. "You were told to open the door." Victoria's expression hardened. "Who told you?" The manager shook his head. "I was not given a name." Daniel looked at the key card. Then he looked at Victoria. "We should go." Victoria immediately objected. "No." Daniel nodded. "That's reasonable." Victoria stared at him. "You agree?" "Yes." He paused. "But whoever arranged this wants us to stay away from that room." Victoria became silent. Daniel continued, "Which means there may be something there we need to see." Victoria didn't like the logic, but she knew Daniel was often right. A few minutes later, they walked through a quiet section of the hotel. The old suite was located away from the main guest rooms. Daniel inserted the key card. The door opened. Victoria stared inside. The room was almost completely empty. There was only one wooden desk beside the large window. On the desk sat a white envelope. Victoria approached slowly. Her name was written on it. Victoria Hale. She opened it. Inside was a short letter. She read the first line, then stopped. Daniel watched her. "What does it say?" Victoria handed him the letter. Daniel read it. His face changed. Victoria noticed immediately. "You know this handwriting." Daniel slowly nodded. "Yes." "Whose?" He looked at her. "Your father's." Victoria froze. "My father?" Daniel nodded. "He wrote this." "That's impossible." "Why?" "My father died 12 years ago." Daniel looked back at the letter. "I know." Victoria took it from him. At the bottom was a date. Tomorrow's date. She stared at it. How could he write something dated tomorrow? Daniel didn't answer. Victoria looked at him. "Daniel, what aren't you telling me?" He took a deep breath. "Your father hired me before you ever knew my name." Victoria's eyes widened. "For what?" Daniel looked toward the bright Dubai skyline. "To protect you." Victoria couldn't speak. Daniel continued. "He knew someone inside the company was planning to destroy everything your family had built." "Who?" "I never found out." Victoria stepped closer. "And you work for my father?" "Yes." "Then why did you become my secretary?" Daniel looked directly at her. "Because your father asked me to stay close to you." Victoria felt betrayed. "You've been watching me for 6 years?" "Not watching you." "Then what?" "Protecting you." Victoria shook her head. "I don't know whether I can trust you anymore." Daniel didn't argue. He simply placed the letter on the desk. Then he pointed toward the final sentence. Victoria read it again. "Trust Daniel. Do not sign anything tomorrow morning." Her expression changed. "Tomorrow's meeting." Daniel nodded. "The investment agreement." Victoria slowly understood. Someone wasn't trying to ruin her company. They were trying to make her sign something. Something that would change everything. And whoever was behind it knew exactly how to use her father's name. But there was one thing they didn't know. Daniel had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, and he was finally ready to reveal the truth. The truth about Victoria's father. The truth about the company. And the reason he had become a single father without ever leaving Victoria's side. Victoria looked at him. "Tell me everything." Daniel nodded. But before he could speak, his phone rang. He answered. His sister was calling. Daniel's face immediately changed. "What happened?" Victoria watched him carefully. Daniel listened for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "Keep Sophie with you." He ended the call. Victoria stepped forward. "What happened?" Daniel looked at her. "Sophie found something in my old suitcase." "What?" Daniel's voice became serious. "A photograph." "Of whom?" "Your father." Victoria's heart sank. Daniel continued. "And Sophie says there's a message written on the back." "What message?" Daniel stared at Victoria. "It says, 'Tell Victoria the truth before they find her.'" Victoria looked toward the Dubai skyline. For the first time, the world's most confident CEO realized something terrifying. The danger wasn't coming tomorrow. It had already arrived. And her single dad secretary might be the only person standing between her and the people who had been waiting for this moment for 15 years. Daniel stood beside the old desk, still holding his phone. Victoria watched him carefully. "What exactly did Sophie find?" "A photograph." "Of my father?" "Yes." "How did she get it?" "It was inside an old suitcase I left at home." Victoria took a slow breath. Why would your daughter be looking through your suitcase? She wasn't. Daniel looked uncomfortable. My sister was packing some things for her. Sophie found a photograph. Victoria looked at the letter again. Can you get a picture of it? I already did. Daniel showed her his phone. The photograph was old. Victoria's father stood outside his London office. Beside him was a much younger Daniel. But there was someone else in the picture. A man Victoria didn't recognize. She pointed at him. Who is that? Daniel became silent. You know him? Yes. Who? Daniel finally answered. Richard Blake. Victoria's face changed. Richard Blake had been one of the most powerful executives at her father's company. He had disappeared from the business shortly before her father's death. Victoria remembered hearing his name when she was younger. She had always been told he had left after a disagreement. Daniel shook his head. He didn't leave. Victoria looked at him. What happened? He was removed. By my father? Yes. Why? Daniel looked at the photograph. Because your father discovered that Richard had been moving company money through several private accounts. Victoria's eyes widened. How much? Enough to destroy the company. Victoria stared at him. Then why was Richard never arrested? Because the evidence disappeared. How? Daniel looked directly at her. Someone inside the company destroyed it. Victoria felt a chill. Who? We never found out. Daniel put the photograph away. But that's not the worst part. Victoria's voice became quieter. What is? Richard Blake is in Dubai. Victoria froze. Are you sure? I saw him this morning. Where? At the hotel. Victoria immediately walked toward the door. Daniel stopped her. Where are you going? To find him. That's exactly what he wants. Victoria turned around. I'm not afraid of him. I know. Daniel stepped closer. That's what worries me. Victoria stared at him. For years, people had told her that she was too stubborn, too independent, too unwilling to trust anyone. But Daniel was different. He never tried to control her. He simply stood beside her. That made his warning harder to ignore. They returned to the main hotel floor. The afternoon was still bright, and the lobby was crowded with business travelers and guests. Victoria scanned the room. Where did you see Richard? Daniel pointed toward the far side, near the restaurant. They walked in that direction. Richard was gone, but a man in a gray suit was sitting at a table. He looked at Victoria, then immediately looked away. Daniel noticed. Keep walking. Victoria whispered. Why? Because that man just recognized you. They continued toward the elevators. The man stood up. Daniel pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. Victoria stepped inside. Daniel followed. The doors closed. Only then did Victoria speak. Who was he? I don't know. You're sure? Daniel looked at her. No. Victoria gave him a suspicious look. You knew something. I suspected something. What? Daniel reached into his jacket. He pulled out a folded document. This was given to me at the airport. Victoria opened it. It was a copy of a company transfer agreement. Her name appeared at the top. She read the details. Then her face went pale. Someone is trying to transfer controlling ownership of Hale International. Daniel nodded. Tomorrow morning. Victoria stared at him. And my signature is required. Yes. Who benefits? Daniel pointed to the final page. A private investment company. Victoria recognized the name. She had seen it before. Blake Holdings. Daniel nodded. Richard Blake. Victoria closed the document. He's tried to take my company. Not exactly. What do you mean? He already owns part of it. Victoria stared at him. How much? Daniel answered quietly. 31%. Victoria couldn't believe it. That's impossible. Your father sold him shares years ago. Why didn't I know? Because the shares were held through another company. Victoria's expression hardened. So he has been planning this for years. Daniel nodded. Yes. The elevator doors opened. They stepped onto another floor. Victoria looked at him. Then why bring me to Dubai? Because the final agreement is being signed here. And if I don't sign, Blake can't take control. Victoria smiled slightly. Then I won't sign. Daniel looked at her. That's what your father wanted. Victoria's smile disappeared. You said he asked you to protect me. Yes. Did he know this would happen? I believe he did. How? Daniel looked at the old photograph. Because he left instructions. Where? With me? Victoria stopped walking. What instructions? Daniel took a small metal key from his pocket. This. Victoria stared at it. What does it open? A safety deposit box. Where? In London. Then why are we standing in Dubai? Daniel smiled faintly. Because your father left one more clue. He turned the key over. There was a tiny number engraved on it. 4107. Victoria stared at the number. The suite? Daniel nodded. The royal suite wasn't random. Victoria suddenly understood. My father arranged this. Years ago. But how could he know? I'd be here. He didn't. Daniel looked at her. He knew one day you would face this exact situation. Victoria felt overwhelmed. For the first time, she wondered how much of her life had been shaped by decisions made before she understood them. Then Daniel's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A message had arrived. You have until 5 o'clock. Victoria looked at the clock. It was 4:18 p.m. What happens at 5? Daniel didn't answer. Another message appeared. Bring Victoria alone. Daniel immediately locked his phone. Victoria saw it. Who sent that? I don't know. Daniel. He looked at her. You said you trust me. I do. Then tell me. Daniel took a breath. The message came from Richard Blake. Victoria stepped closer. What does he want? You. Why? Because he believes you have something your father left behind. Victoria shook her head. I don't have anything. Daniel looked at her. That's what he thinks. And what do you think? I think your father left the most important thing with you. What? Daniel's answer surprised her. Your trust. Victoria stared at him. Daniel continued. Your father knew you would eventually become CEO. He knew that. He believed you were the only person capable of rebuilding the company. Victoria's eyes became emotional. My father never told me that. He couldn't. Why? Because he knew people were listening. Victoria looked down. Then she noticed something on Daniel's wrist. A small old watch. She had seen it before. That watch! Daniel looked at it. What about it? My father had one like that. Daniel became silent. He gave it to me. When? The last time I saw him. Victoria's eyes widened. You saw him before he died? Yes. How long before? 3 days. Why didn't you tell me? Because he made me promise. Victoria's voice shook. What did he say? Daniel looked at her. He said, when Victoria's ready, tell her that I never abandoned her. Victoria looked away. She had spent 12 years believing her father had chosen his company over his family. Now everything she believed was beginning to fall apart. Daniel reached out, but stopped himself. He didn't touch her. Instead, he quietly said, Your father loved you. Victoria wiped away a tear. I wish he had told me. He wanted to. Then why didn't he? Daniel looked toward the window. Because he was afraid. Of Richard. Of everyone. A loud notification interrupted them. Daniel checked his phone. His expression immediately became serious. What now? The hotel manager. What did he say? Daniel read the message. Then he looked at Victoria. Someone has entered the royal suite. Victoria's eyes widened. Who? We don't know. Security? On the way. Victoria started walking toward the suite. Daniel followed. When they reached the corridor, the door was open. Victoria stopped. Daniel moved in front of her. Stay here. No. Victoria. I am not standing outside my own room. They entered together. The room looked untouched. But the black folder was gone. The old letter was gone. Only one thing remained. A photograph on the desk. Victoria picked it up. Her father was standing beside a young Daniel. And on the back was a handwritten message. Victoria read it aloud. Daniel knows where the money is. She looked at Daniel. What money? Daniel stared at the photograph. I don't know. Victoria turned the photograph over. There was another sentence. The money was never stolen. Daniel's eyes widened. Then a final line. It was protected. Victoria whispered. Protected from whom? Daniel looked toward the door. From Richard? Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Daniel moved closer to Victoria. A man entered the suite. It was Richard Blake, older now, but Victoria recognized him immediately. Richard smiled. Victoria. Daniel stepped between them. Richard laughed. You always were protective, Daniel. Victoria looked at Richard. You know him? Of course. Richard smiled. Your father trusted him. Daniel's face hardened. And he never trusted you. Richard's smile disappeared. You have until 5 o'clock. Victoria looked at the clock. 4:56 p.m. Richard continued. Sign the agreement, and Hale International remains yours. Victoria frowned. And if I refuse? Richard looked at Daniel. Then your secretary's daughter may become involved in something much bigger than this. Daniel immediately stepped forward. Leave my daughter out of this. Richard smiled. Then perhaps you should give Victoria what her father left you. Victoria looked at Daniel. What does he mean? Daniel said nothing. Richard turned toward the door. For minutes, he walked away. Victoria waited until he disappeared. Then she looked at Daniel. What did my father leave you? Daniel slowly opened his briefcase. Inside was a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table. I promised your father I'd only open this when Richard came for you. Victoria stared at the envelope. Daniel looked at her. I think that time has come. He opened it. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. Victoria read it. Her father's message contained only 6 words. Trust Daniel. Never trust the agreement. Victoria looked at Daniel. What's on the drive? Daniel connected it to his laptop. A video appeared. Victoria saw her father sitting behind a desk. Older, tired, but alive. He looked directly into the camera. And then he said the words that changed everything. Victoria, if you're watching this, Richard has finally come for you. The screen went black. Victoria stared at Daniel. Neither of them spoke. Then the laptop displayed one final message. Second video available. Password required. Daniel looked at Victoria. She whispered, What password? Daniel smiled sadly. I think your father expected you to know. Victoria stared at the screen. Then she remembered something from her childhood. A phrase her father had repeated every birthday. She typed it. The second video opened, and the truth about the company began to appear. The second video began playing. Victoria stared at the screen. Her father's face appeared again. This time, he looked calmer. Victoria, if you are watching this, then Richard has already tried to force you into signing the agreement. Victoria looked at Daniel. Her father continued. Do not believe him. The video revealed that the shares Richard had secretly collected were not actually enough to control Hale International. Her father had created a separate trust years earlier. The trust protected the company's most valuable assets, and the person appointed to protect that trust was Daniel. Victoria couldn't believe it. You were protecting the company this entire time. Daniel nodded. Your father asked me to. Why didn't you tell me? Because he believed telling you too early would put you in danger. Victoria looked back at the screen. Her father's message continued. Daniel will never ask you to trust him blindly. He will give you the truth when the time is right. Victoria looked at Daniel. For the first time, she understood why he had always remained so calm. He hadn't simply been her secretary. He had been carrying a promise for 15 years. The video continued. Richard believes he can take control of the company because he thinks the trust is empty. Victoria leaned closer. But it isn't. Her father's expression changed. The trust contains the original controlling shares. Victoria's eyes widened. Daniel paused the video. Victoria looked at him. How many shares? Enough to stop Richard. Who owns them? Daniel answered quietly. You. Victoria froze. My father put them in my name? Yes. Then why didn't I know? Because the trust was designed to remain invisible until you became CEO. Victoria sat down. Everything suddenly made sense. Her father's strange decisions, Daniel's loyalty, the royal suite, the old key, the mysterious letter. None of it had been random. Her father had prepared a path for her long before she understood where it would lead. Then the video continued. Victoria, there is one more thing. Her father looked directly into the camera. The company was never my greatest concern. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. It was you. The video showed him smiling. I wanted you to have a life where you never had to fear losing everything. Victoria covered her mouth. Her father continued. I failed to protect you when I should have. The video ended. The room became silent. Victoria looked at Daniel. How long have you had that recording? 6 years. 6 years? Yes. And you never watched it? I watched it once. Why? Because your father asked me to make sure you saw it only when you were ready. Victoria looked down. Then she smiled sadly. I hated him. Daniel didn't respond. I thought he chose his company over me. Daniel quietly said, he spent his final years trying to make sure you never had to choose between family and success. Victoria wiped her eyes. Then she stood. Where's Richard? Daniel looked surprised. Why? Because I'm done running. Victoria walked toward the door. Daniel followed. They returned to the main conference area of the hotel. Richard was waiting. He stood beside several lawyers and business executives. His expression was confident. Victoria, she walked toward him. You wanted my signature. Yes. Then you can have my answer. Richard smiled. Excellent. Victoria placed the agreement on the table. Then she pushed it back toward him. No. Richard's smile disappeared. What? I said no. One of the lawyers stepped forward. You understand that refusing this agreement could have serious consequences. Victoria looked at him. I understand. Richard's voice became colder. You don't have the authority to stop this. Victoria smiled. Actually, I do. She placed another document on the table. Richard looked at it. His face changed. What is this? The Hale Family Trust. Richard stared at the pages. That's impossible. Victoria looked at him. My father transferred controlling ownership into the trust years ago. Richard shook his head. That trust is worthless. Daniel stepped forward. No. Richard looked at him. Daniel placed the final document on the table. The trust owns 49% of Hale International. Richard went silent. Victoria continued. And I am the sole beneficiary. Richard's confidence disappeared. You can't prove that. Daniel opened his briefcase. I can. He placed the original documents in front of the lawyers. They checked them carefully. The room became silent. One lawyer finally looked at Richard. The documents appear legitimate. Richard's face turned pale. Victoria stood calmly. You spent 15 years planning to take my company. Richard glared at her. You think you've won? No. Victoria looked at Daniel. I know I've won. Richard turned toward Daniel. You betrayed me. Daniel shook his head. I never worked for you. Richard laughed bitterly. You work for father. Daniel nodded. And now I work for her. Victoria looked at him. For the first time, the relationship between them felt different. Not CEO and secretary. Not employer and employee. Two people who had survived the same storm. Then Richard said something unexpected. Ask him why he really became your secretary. Victoria frowned. Daniel looked at Richard. Don't. Richard smiled. He hasn't told you everything. Victoria looked at Daniel. What does he mean? Daniel remained silent. Richard continued. Daniel Carter wasn't simply hired by your father. Victoria waited. Richard smiled. Your father also asked him to investigate me. Victoria looked at Daniel. Is that true? Daniel nodded. Yes. Richard laughed. And while he was investigating me, he discovered something even more important. Victoria's voice became quiet. What? Richard looked at Daniel. Daniel discovered that your father was not killed by natural causes. The room went silent. Victoria felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her. My father... Daniel stepped forward. Victoria, listen to me. Was he murdered? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Who did it? Richard looked away. Daniel's expression became hard. We never proved who ordered it. Richard suddenly laughed. Victoria turned toward him. You know. Richard shook his head. I know what your father discovered. What? He discovered that someone inside the company was working with an outside criminal network. Victoria's face hardened. Who? Richard looked at Daniel. Not me? Daniel didn't respond. Richard continued. Your father believed I was responsible because you stole the money. I moved money. Victoria stared at him. But I didn't steal it. Then where did it go? Richard smiled. Asked Daniel. Victoria turned. Daniel looked down. Then he finally told her. The money wasn't stolen. Victoria remembered the message. The money was never stolen. It was protected. Where is it? Daniel took out another document. The money was transferred into the trust. Victoria stared. How much? Daniel answered quietly. Enough to rebuild everything your father lost. Victoria couldn't believe it. Richard looked defeated. You don't understand. Victoria looked at him, then explained. Richard's voice became bitter. Your father didn't trust anyone. He trusted Daniel. He trusted him because Daniel was willing to sacrifice everything. Victoria looked at Daniel. Richard continued, even his own future. Victoria didn't understand. What does that mean? Daniel finally spoke. When your father died, I was offered a position in the company. Why didn't you take it? Because I had Sophie. Victoria remembered. Daniel had become a father shortly before joining Hale International. He had always told her that his daughter was his priority. Now she understood why. He had chosen a quieter life. A life where he could protect Sophie while keeping his promise to Victoria's father. Victoria looked at him. You gave up a career to protect my family. Daniel smiled. I chose my family. Victoria's eyes became emotional. And Sophie, my daughter comes first. Victoria nodded. Of course. Then she smiled. That's exactly why you're the person my father trusted. Daniel smiled back. Outside, the Dubai afternoon remained bright. Cars moved along the streets. People walked through the hotel lobby. Life continued as normal. But inside that conference room, an entire 15-year mystery had finally been uncovered. Richard's lawyers eventually withdrew. The takeover attempt collapsed. The Hale International Board formally recognized Victoria's controlling position, and the agreement Richard had prepared was never signed. But Victoria wasn't finished. She returned to the royal suite with Daniel. The room looked completely different now. It no longer felt like a trap. It felt like the place where her life had changed. Victoria stood beside the window. I came to Dubai thinking I was stranded. Daniel smiled. You were. She looked at him. Not anymore. Daniel nodded. Victoria turned toward him. I owe you an apology. For what? For doubting you. You had every right. No. She shook her head. I should have trusted the person who had been standing beside me all these years. Daniel smiled. You didn't know. Victoria walked toward the desk. The old key was still there. She picked it up. Then she noticed something engraved on the back. A small sentence. Family is the promise you keep when nobody is watching. Victoria looked at Daniel. Did my father write this? Daniel smiled. Yes. She nodded. Then she asked the question she had been avoiding. What happens now? Daniel looked at her. Now you go back to London. And you? I go back to Sophie. Victoria smiled. She'll be proud of you. Daniel laughed. She'll probably ask why I was gone so long. Victoria looked out at Dubai. Tell her you were helping someone. Who? Victoria smiled. Your boss. Daniel laughed. But before he could leave, Victoria stopped him. Daniel. He turned. Yes. Would you consider staying? At the company? Victoria shook her head. Not as my secretary. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Then what? Victoria smiled. Chief of Staff. Daniel laughed. That's a promotion. You earned it. He thought for a moment. Can I bring Sophie to the next board meeting? Victoria smiled. Only if she brings her drawings. Daniel nodded. Deal. They left the suite together. The royal door closed behind them. And for the first time in 15 years, the secret surrounding Victoria's family was finally over. But Victoria did know one thing. Her father had left one final message. Not for her, not for Daniel, for Sophie. Weeks later, back in London, Sophie opened the old photograph again. She turned it over. There was another sentence beneath the message they had already discovered. Daniel had never seen it. Victoria hadn't seen it. It said, "One day, Sophie will know why her father was chosen." Sophie looked at her father. "Dad." Daniel smiled. "Yes." "Who was my grandfather's friend?" Daniel froze. Victoria looked at him. And suddenly they realized the story wasn't completely finished. Because the final secret wasn't about Hale International. It was about why Daniel had been chosen in the first place. And why. 15 years earlier, Victoria's father had trusted a young single father with the future of his entire family. The answer would eventually change Daniel's life too. But for now, Victoria finally had something she had wanted for years. A family story she could believe. A company she could protect. And someone beside her who had never asked for recognition. Daniel Carter had entered the royal suite without knocking. He had arrived when she was stranded. He had protected her when she didn't even know she needed protection. And in the end, the man she once considered simply her secretary became the person she trusted most. Not because he had money, not because he had power, but because when everyone else was trying to gain something from her, Daniel had spent 15 years making sure she had something worth keeping. Trust, family, and a second chance.